Throughout his arrest, trial, and sentencing, Jesus was mocked and taunted by his accusers. Adding insult to injury, some of those mockers felt the need to continue hurling their vicious taunts while Jesus hung dying on the cross. There they stood at the foot of the cross, scoffing, "He saved others, let him save himself." Even the soldiers mocked Jesus, whom they really didn't know nor care about. "If you are a king, save yourself." And as we just heard, the two criminals hanging beside Jesus also chose to use their own last words to join in the chorus of verbal assault. "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us," they shouted. Like Jesus, they too are choosing to die the way they had lived. Despicable bandits who ambushed unsuspecting travelers, savagely beating them and stealing all their possessions. Here they savagely attack Jesus not with their fists, but with their words. Until one of them has a sudden change of heart. And he says to his partner in crime, "Do you not fear God? We are getting what we deserve. This man has done nothing wrong." That's how it is in this world, in our notion of justice. People get what they deserve. The guilty are punished. The innocent are set free, not the other way around. In this world, people save themselves before they save others, should they even choose to do so. Yet hearing Jesus offer forgiveness to those who continued to mock and taunt him, and watching him refuse to save himself, rather than offer up this incredible gift of sacrificial love. This hardened criminal comes to see for himself that Jesus is his Savior, the only one able to forgive him of his life of sin. What we might call his deathbed confession leads this repentant thief to a drastic conversion to faith. "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Accepting his confession, Jesus offers him blessed assurance that on that very day, he would be with Jesus in paradise. The blessed assurance we all seek at the time of our own death. Throughout my ministry, I've heard my fair share of deathbed confessions. And my most memorable one happened many years ago. An elderly gentleman, who I'll call Tom, collapsed at the end of the worship service. I followed the ambulance to the hospital and waited with his family as the doctors attended to him. When Tom was finally stable, his family and I were allowed into his room. Some time later, he asked his family to clear out so that he could talk to me alone. Now, one of the greatest gifts of being a pastor is coming to know the stories behind people's lives. And though I had heard it many times before, Tom again told me the story of how he had survived his own harrowing near-death experience when his plane was shot down over the Pacific during World War II. That was for him a defining moment of faith. From that day on, Tom felt like he was living on borrowed time, causing him to be grateful for each day of his long life. And no longer was he afraid to die. So I stood there nodding as he retold me the story, waiting to hear what he had so urgently needed to tell me. Finally, Tom said he had something he needed to confess, something he had never told another living soul, even his beloved wife of over 60 years, quickly assuring me that he had committed his grievous sin long before he had ever met her. From the look on his face and the somber tone in his voice, I knew it was something that Tom was very much ashamed of. And knowing him as I did, I couldn't imagine what awful sin he could possibly have committed to warrant this apparent deathbed confession. Out it came. The awful thing of which Tom was so ashamed was that as a college freshman, to help pay his way through school, he sold on the black market, putting it discreetly, certain items of protection for $1 to his 19-year-old college buddies. Now, I was sure that must have felt quite scandalous in the 1940s, but it was not at all what I had begun to imagine. And thankfully, the giggle, a mixture of relief and humor that bubbled up inside me, was quickly subdued by the sweet sincerity in Tom's voice. He was desperately seeking assurance that God would forgive him, that he might die in peace. I led him in a prayer of confession, assured him his sin had been forgiven, and I repeated Jesus' promise to him. Today, you, Tom, will be with me in paradise. By the great blessing of God, Tom didn't die that day, but I could see that a great burden had been lifted from his soul. And it is not just the weight of the sin he carried. Tom had been freed from the lingering doubt that he was really good enough to go to heaven. And it's not an all uncommon concern. It's one I've heard over and over again in many other deathbed confessions. There is still some part in each of us that believes that good people go to heaven and bad people go straight to hell, leaving us to question our own worthiness for receiving Christ's gift of salvation. If you saw the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, about Mr. Rogers, even he doubted his own goodness and whether or not he would enter into his eternal rest with Jesus by his side. When he was near death, he asked his wife Joanne, "Am I a sheep?" referring to Jesus' parable of the separation of the sheep from the goats at the throne of mercy. It's an astonishing question coming from such a kind and gracious man who showed all of us how we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. His beloved wife assured Mr. Rogers that when she said, "If anyone is a sheep, you are." But in the face of his own death, even he wondered, was he good enough? If there is any story in the Bible that teaches us that our salvation is by grace alone through our faith, and not something we earn by our own merit, it is this story of the penitent thief. It is only Christ's goodness at work within us that enables and empowers us to be and to do good. listening to the voice of our good shepherd, we will and can live in the way of righteousness. Then we will know the blessed assurance that as his sheep, we will follow him into paradise. The cross depicted on the front of our bulletin this morning is known as the budded cross, reminding us that we are to grow in our wholehearted trust in the never-ending graciousness of our good and loving Savior. So this morning we give thanks that the cross of crucifixion has become the cross of our salvation.